Looking at David, and we are in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Arguably the most well-known event probably for Christians and non-Christians alike. If you were asked somebody to tell you something about David in the Bible, no doubt this would be the event that people would be familiar with. Well, we're looking at aspects of this tonight, and last time we were together, it probably get overlooked in the reading and awareness of what's taking place here. So as we are considering 1 Samuel 17, I'd like for us to look once again at Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 7. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 7.
The Lord will cause your enemies who rise up against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways.
We had seen this last week, and I wanted to go over it once again to set the tone for a reminder as we continue looking at this episode. Because if we're not aware of and keeping front and center the Word of God is going to be less of an influence and have less of an impact in our understanding. But we want the Word of God front and center, right? So what is this word? What is the promise that is given to the people of Israel here in Deuteronomy 28?
God will defeat our enemies.
God will defeat our enemies. And how is it spoken? I want us to see this wording.
Art. Yeah, you will grant your enemies who rise up against you to be defeated.
Okay? So,
The word definite be?
definite?
He will.
He will. Okay, so that would be in the...
There's no room for he won't.
No, it's a definitive sense, right?
Mhm.
And so they will come against you one way and they'll flee away from you 7 ways. So this idea that they will be absolutely scattered. All right, so they're not just going to walk away. It's like they're going to be absolutely decimated by the power of God. Do we see this picture? This terminology that's being used, it's an idiom. It's a Hebrew figure of speech. So it's something that's saying much bigger than they'll come to you one way and flee from you 7. It's just that they're going to be so completely decimated and overwhelmed that you'll wonder, where were the enemies that even came against me? All right, so this is the Word of God. Now, when Moses is speaking this, what kind of a time frame are we at? The people of Israel are in the wilderness after having come out of Egypt. What kind of a time frame after Egypt are we talking about here, and how long before the Promised Land are we looking at? Just a couple of months. So Moses is just on the verge of dying, and he is reminding the people of all of the covenant of God and his promises. And so he's giving part of that here in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Well, let's fast forward to Joshua 23 and verse 10.
Actually, I got here.
And before we even read this, where are the people of Israel in Joshua 23?
They're in the promised land.
They are in the Promised Land. And how long have they been in the promised land for? Several years, yeah, like, you know what, I didn't stop to do the math, but Joshua is at the end of his days, and, pardon me? My mathematician wife is doing some.
Well, how, he was what?
110.
When he came into the promised land, was he like 40?
When he came into the promised land, he would have been around 60-ish.
Okay, so 110
65.
now. He dies at 110 on the next page. So.
Yeah, so 50, 45 years they've been in the land. So he's about to die. All right, do you understand what's taking place here? Now, with that in mind, people have been in the land for, let's say, for even terms, about the same amount of time as they had been in the wilderness. All right? So it's been about 80 plus years since they've come out of Egypt. Now, Joshua 23 and verse 10.
One of you roots 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised.
All right, so one of you roots, what does that mean, one of you roots? Makes them run away. So you say roots, some might say routes. One routes 1,000, and
Puts to flight is what he
so puts to flight. That's so sends them packing. they take off. All right, so one sends to flight or routes or routes. How many? 1,000 and two.
One
does say.
Yeah, it just says one of you wrote 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you.
That's right. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so one does 1,000. Pardon me?
The next one, two
to 10,000.
So where did you get that?
In Samuel, because it was on the show. David
We
said
also
it to his
touched on it
group.
last week.
What's that?
I thought we mentioned that somewhere last week.
It might have been mentioned, but we didn't actually look at anything. We're going to look at that tonight.
Spoiler alert.
All right, so one does 1,000 here. It's come to you one way, and he will flee from you.
I know, like Saul struck down his thousands and David his tens of thousands.
All right, there's one, and then here's 7, right? Just so that we understand what that drawing is, what that illustration is. Do we understand the promise of the Word of God? Did he say that he was going to deliver them? All right, good. Something for us to be aware of. All right, let's come to 1 Samuel 17. Now we're going to be starting reviewing some of these verses, but not reviewing so much the content or the information that we had dealt with. We're going to deal with some new things this evening. So we had come across Goliath, of course, and as he comes, let's pick it up in verse 4 and verse 7. Pardon me?
The other one was in Deuteronomy 32.
Okay, so
You might have said that on a Sunday morning because it was talking about the
that
law.
was different, yeah.
That's why Brian said, okay.
That was
I
different.
wasn't here Sunday.
No, not this Sunday, the
The
week
former Sunday morning.
Now you're stretching my memory.
You were the one
All
that
right.
thought of it, I didn't.
It came across.
All right, so good. So we'll come back to that momentarily, okay? So we're going to do verses 4 to 7 to begin with, all right?
There came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and the shield bearer went before him.
Shield bearer had quite a job then.
The shield bearer did quite a job, yeah. Now, when a shield bearer, now think about this for a moment. Most often if there's a drawing depicting David and Goliath, it's just David and Goliath, and in the background would be the armies on either side, right? There's no indication of a shield bearer anywhere in there. So what's the shield bearer? What's he doing? What's his job?
Carrying the shield.
Okay, so how does that work? What might it look like, do you think?
Shield walking
Okay, so this is a tall shield that the shield bearer, and it would be a slot so that he'd be able to see through it, and then he's being the shield for the person behind him, and in this case, it's Goliath. Because, now, oftentimes we think, and what's going on here with the people of Israel, this giant, he's come out how many times by the time David comes to the field?
40 times.
40 days, so 80 times.
So 80 times 40 days.
Oh, yeah.
All right, it's twice a day, morning and evening. You remember what we saw last week that they had forgotten about with morning and evening? What took place? Morning and evening. The sacrifices, the morning sacrifice, the evening sacrifice, trusting in the Lord their God. Now, here comes Goliath, and they're full of fear regarding him, aren't they? And because of their fear, it's influencing their response and their reactions so that they don't see that God is great in this instance. They're looking at Goliath as being great. I wish we had a champion like the Philistines had, right?
Human worship.
Exactly. So fear is influencing their hearts, it's influencing their behavior, and it's sort of this idea that he's so big and imposing and intimidating that how can we not fear? And that we could never, no one of us could ever attack him or take him on. David sort of has the mindset through the lens of faith looking at the Lord. He's so big, I can't miss him. Right? But it's not trusting in his strength or the size of the target or his ability. But it's just that mindset that he's trusting in the Lord. So they're full of, the people of Israel, they're full of fear. When David comes on the scene, he's full of faith. When we see Goliath here, there's an arrogance about him, isn't there? So I want us to see the difference between fear and faith. You've got fear and faith. So in this instance, we see that fear is full of arrogance. One or two? That look right?
Can't see through the beat.
Excuse me. So we got fear coming with arrogance. That's what fear is all about, right? Arrogance. But there's not a lot of substance to it. I mean, there is an element of substance to it, but in the face of God, is there any substance to fear? We think of faith. What is a contrast of arrogance where there's fear? With faith, there ought to be so the confidence of faith versus the arrogance of fear. The people of Israel, for 40 days now this has been happening. Now, why is it that they've been influenced so strongly by fear in this situation so that the first time that this giant comes out, that they quiver in their boots? Instead of stand strong with confidence, trusting in faith in do you remember what we saw? Promise of God, right? Deuteronomy and Joshua. The Word of God gave them a promise. But many of them, they've not been exposed to the Word or in the Word, and it's been how long now since they've been in the land of Israel? Some 400 years, 450 years. So that's a long time to go past. But where have their sights been? Remember 1 Samuel chapter 8. Give us a king, so we give us a tall king. Yeah. And they asked for it. Remember, the name Saul actually means asked for or asked. And God gave them what they were asking for, so that they were putting their trust in what they could see, and what they're seeing is a tall king who is full of fear because he trusted in himself. And now, we see in chapter 16, just before this, the last thing we see is that David is full, he has had the Holy Spirit come upon him, and the Spirit of God has now departed from or left Saul. So there's no wonder that he's full of fear, and because their eyes are on the king that they asked for instead of the king who was the king of Israel. They couldn't be full of faith so long as their eyes were on the one who was full of fear. So this giant comes out, Goliath by name, and I want us to notice a few things here regarding him. How tall is he?
9 feet.
Okay.
6 cubits in the span.
6. We're going to go with the cubit measurement because that's how it appears literally in the text. The 9 feet is a translation or interpretation for us, okay? So he is 6 cubits and a span, right?
Still today, I was looking for my cubit.
You couldn't find your cubit stick. You should have called Todd. Okay, in verse 7, have a look. How heavy was the spear's head?
600 shekels.
600 shekels. Pardon me? It's about 15 pounds.
6.9
All right? 15 pounds just for the head of the spear. His armor weighs over 150 pounds. I mean, that's a weight. We'd be doing good for 2 of us to carry that, right? He's wearing that. But remember how tall he is. We saw the differential on that chart we looked at last week. Why don't we just bring it up just for a moment to refresh our memories? Yeah, that's my weight. He's wearing my weight. A little more.
You hanging over Todd's back all day long.
Come here, Todd. Let's see how you manage here.
Last time I was doing these demonstrations, it didn't go well.
That's right. All right, can we bring that up just to get it's probably about 5 slides ahead. All right, so we see the size difference.
I'm working on it. How many slides? I'm like at 8 now. What do you have?
One more. There you go. All right, so remember this blue silhouette is a depiction of the size of Goliath in comparison to somebody who stands not quite 6 feet tall. 5'10" or so is the man, and of course you see the kids that are standing there. Okay. Now, with that in mind, we've got his height, we've got the weight of his tip of his spear. How many pieces of armor do we see here? Shin pads. Go and play soccer. Hockey. Oh, sorry, hockey, yes.
I think 6.
500.
It's the mark of the beast.
He's 6 cubits tall. His
Last line I thought it said his ring bearer.
his spear The head of his spear weighs 600 shekels, and they use 6 pieces of armor. Just an interesting observation.
Man.
It's a number of man, right? But it also relates to the mark of the beast. Or let's even take it away from the mark of the beast for a moment, but the beast himself, right? So in Revelation chapter 13, why don't we go there for a moment, and let's have a look at verses 16 to 18.
There's one.
13, I said 16 to 18. All right, yeah. Todd, I guess we're, I don't know, we're at, all right, sorry, thank you, we're at Carol.
16 to 8. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and
I'm
poor.
just going to interrupt you just for a second, just to read just a little bit louder so that we can pick it up online, please.
He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. One more. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is a man's number. His number is 666.
All right, so the number of the beast is? We often look at that simply to say it's the mark of the beast is 666, and we look at the mark as the number, right? But the number is the number of the beast. So it's indicative or represents the beast, which is a number representing man. Now, lest we think that I maybe took a little bit too much poetic license with this 666 with Goliath, let's go to Daniel chapter 3 for a moment. So Daniel 3, if you go to Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, what did I say?
You said Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah.
Sorry, okay, so I was going Ezekiel, it's after that, but then I was backing up. So Isaiah, Jeremiah,
Ezekiel.
Lamentations, Ezekiel, and then Daniel. All right, so that's what I was, no, I was not getting mixed up, I just phrased it too close together. All right, don't give me a hard time, I'll give you a hard time. I'm holding the chalk stick.
Okay.
The chalk marker. All right, Daniel chapter 3, we're reading the first 6 verses.
King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, government, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, measures, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O people, nations, and men of every gauge. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace.
All right. Now, this image, idol, statue that Nebuchadnezzar has constructed, why has he constructed this image? Any idea?
Well, part of it was probably because of the dream he had.
Probably because of the dream that he had, where he was the head. Babylon was the head of this image that he had in his dream. And so he decides, well, okay, I'm a great king. This is me. Yeah, let's make this massive statue. And I'm going to make the people bow down and worship this image. Now, how tall is the image?
90 feet high.
90 feet high. Let's
60 cubits.
All right, that's what we want. We want what the Hebrew would be here, or the Aramaic. And so the 90 feet is the translation of this. So it's 60 feet high. How wide is it? 6 cubits wide. How many musical instruments are listed?
6.
Number of man. What does this image represent? Man, in all of its ruling, all of its kingdoms, all of its dominion. Because it's going to be shown in a different way. It's rather than the image. See, the image is how man looks at the government and rule and power of man. But when God looks at all of that, how does he see it? And then we see a depiction of it throughout the rest of the book of Daniel as these beasts, leopard and the bear and so on. Okay? So as these grotesque things. But they all represent the power of man and man's desire to rule over, above, and instead of God. And they're all animated by the prince, the power of this world. Even to the point that Revelation, that we had looked at in Revelation chapter 13, that we had seen that the beast, the Antichrist, his number is 666, and what does he set up? The fulfillment of what Daniel is giving to us here with the image of gold, which what the statue is a representation of, a physical representation of. And it goes right back to Genesis chapter 3, doesn't it? Where the Lord speaks to the serpent and said that I'm going to put enmity between whom and what?
His seed in you.
All right, so I'm going to put enmity between
The
woman's seed and your seed, those who come after your likeness. And you will bruise his heel, and he will bruise your head, or crush your head, depending upon the translation. Keep that in mind, all right? What will he do? What will the destroyer do? Bruise or crush his head. Now, with what Satan has stirred up and led man into, that's been his desire ever since, is to lead man away from God and to follow after himself. To turn those that God had created and intended to be worshipers of him and turn them into worshipers of Satan or self or whatever else, and haters of God. So we see Goliath as yet another picture of that seed of the serpent, and David is a depiction of the seed of the woman. And he's a representation of Christ, the one who is the ultimate fulfillment of that seed of the woman. All right, now let's come back to 1 Samuel 17.
Have to have lots of extra paper and mark
I know I got lots of bookmarks and still end up in different spots.
Okay. What metal do we see listed here over and over again?
Bronze.
Bronze.
Comes in third.
Now, in Hebrew, this is the word for bronze, nekoshet. Now, if we take away this letter right here, we get that word. What word is this? Ah!
Take my glasses off for that one.
Okay. This word is nekoshet. Take off the shet, and it would be nekosh.
that was
Nakosh.
going to be my second.
Yeah, that's right. Nakosh. See, in Hebrew, there's usually a three-letter root word. And so it looks the same thing. You get vowel points that make it a different word and so on. Pardon me?
It's a nice book, coach. I'll look back sometime and I
Okay.
won't know what that means.
Nachos.
Josh.
Nako, that's a hard C, like Nebuchadnezzar. Nakosh.
Coach.
Okay? Kosh. Do the same thing and put an ET on the end of it for nakoshet. What is the word nakoshet? This is the word for bronze. This is the word for
Not
not bronze.
wrong.
Anything is not bronze.
Oh.
It's the word for serpent. Now he's wearing something that weighs 150 pounds. What is it? Bronze what?
Chainmail.
Chain mail. Now, that's the
Scale
way,
armor.
that's another interpretation translation.
Scale
Literally
armor.
would be, what is it?
Scale armor.
Scale armor. Scale armor.
So he looks like a bronze snake.
Kind of. You get scales that are closely
Bronze dragon.
packed together. So essentially, like a dragon or a serpent.
And they do have to be able to flex, right? They're not solid pieces.
Yeah, they need to flex somewhat because otherwise your movement is so, I mean, you don't have full mobility or flexibility, but it needs to flex somewhat. It's not like a tube that you've been wrapped in. Okay? And of course, where's the first place we see the serpent? Genesis chapter 3. The Lord spoke to the
Serpent.
Nakosh and said, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman. You will bruise his heel, and he will bruise your head. Do you see that there's more going on here than just a couple of guys setting out on a battlefield? This is a picture of Jesus Christ in David, who has come to destroy the enemy of our souls, who's come to set us free from the dominion of sin. Now, as we continue on, remember David. Let's look first. No, we're not going to, I'll come back to that. That doesn't affect you because you don't know what I was referring to. All right, so let's go ahead to David. He arrives on the scene. He has no idea what's going on. He just knows that there's a battle going on. He's expecting he's expecting to see a battle engaged in, but there's no battle. It's a battle of words. And it's like they've been experiencing this now on the first day. Instead of facing it, remember we looked at fear or faith. Instead of facing it with faith, fear has gotten that toehold has now become, and that foothold has now become a stronghold of fear. And after 30, 35, 37, 38 days, now the 40th day, this fear has become something we got to live with, right? We just deal with it. But they don't have to just deal with it. David comes on the scene and says, this is the way we deal with it. Not in fear, but in faith. Now remember, this isn't primarily a lesson of what do you and I do. This is primarily a picture of Jesus and what he did so that we can do what most often the principles are taken from this book, from this passage. All right? Primarily, it's about Jesus before it's anything to do with you and me. This is not the story of the underdog, and this is not the story of how do you and I overcome our giants. This is the story of Jesus who killed the giant. And because of that, we walk in his victory. All right, so David arrives on the scene. He overhears Goliath, and then he says, what will be done for the man who destroys or defeats this giant? Hears about it, and then notice what Eliab says, Eliab, his brother. Look down in verse 28. What does he say to David about his heart?
Says that you are conceited and I know your heart is wicked. You only come down to watch the battle.
So your heart is what?
Conceited. Wicked.
Wicked, a wicked heart or an evil heart. Yet the Lord told Samuel, I have chosen a king who has a heart after mine.
That's misinformation.
It is misinformation, correct, absolutely. But I want us to see this, that this is what fear does to truth. It distorts the truth. The truth is, he's a man after God's heart. Fear is saying, no, I recognize that. That's an evil heart. That's not good. That's not beneficial. That's not to my benefit. It's not going to help us. It's to our detriment. Pardon me?
Jealous too.
Could have been a little jealous. But this is how fear talks. All right? But yes, could have been jealous as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who do you think he is?
Yeah, he's the oldest and the tallest, and David's the youngest and most likely the smallest. So there's some of that possibly going on also. Well, let's look at verse 31 to 30. Let's do 31 and 32. And we're at Brian, are we?
What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him.
What was overheard that David said? Almost sounds like they overheard his questions, but there's something more than he said than just the questions. He makes a declaration. He makes a statement here. What was the statement that he had made prior to this that the people that has been overheard, and they now bring it to Saul?
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That God should defy the armies of the living God.
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That he should defy the armies of the living God. Doesn't he know? Don't we know? The promises, Deuteronomy 28, Joshua 23. That whoever comes at us one way, this guy, these are going to be big pieces of this one guy fleeing from us 7, plus the entire army. But they've completely ignored this.
His brothers must have felt pretty low after all of this.
Possibly, yeah.
Think like their little brother just took out a giant and freed their whole nation,
Mm-hmm.
and they had the gall to tell him he was wicked.
Yeah, there you go. Let's have a look at Deuteronomy chapter 32. We're going to look here at verses 30 and 31.
How could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight, unless their rock had sold them, and the Lord had given them up? For their rock is not as our rock, our enemies are by themselves.
What does these two verses say? What do they mean? It's saying one chases 1,000 and two chase 10,000. But who's doing the chasing? Let you read it again.
Oh, this is the opposite way.
This is the opposite way. Who's doing the chasing? Who's being spoken to here, first of all? Who is Moses addressing?
The Israelites.
The Israelites. And when he says this, all right, so the people of Israel, all right, so he's saying to them, all right, how could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them and the Lord had given them up? For their rock is not as our rock. Our enemies are by themselves, meaning that we are not by ourselves. What he's saying is this. How could any of our enemies, one of them coming against us and put 1,000 of us to flight and two of them coming to us and chasing 10,000 of us, unless our rock had sold us? Like the first time. Yeah. So in Numbers chapter 14. Now, it wasn't so much that they, it's not so much that they said they couldn't go into the promised land. Said don't go, and they said, well, okay, if you put it that way, looking at the repercussions and consequences of not trusting him, fear instead of faith. So now they're saying, all right, well, we just lost out. So now that you put it in those terms, okay, we're going to go. But Moses said, don't go. The Lord is not with you in this to go. They went and they were defeated because their rock had sold them in that sense. Now, let's go back to verse 19. Still in 32, we're going to verse 19, and we're going to read to 23.
The Lord saw this and rejected them because he was angered by his sons and daughters. I will hide my face from them, he said, and see what their end will be. For they are a perverse generation, children who are unfaithful. They made me jealous by what is no God and angered me by the worthless idols. I will make them envious by those who are not a people. I will make them angry by a nation that has no understanding. For a fire will be kindled in my wrath, and one that burns down to the realm of the dead below. It will devour the earth and its harvests, and set afire the foundations of the mountains. I will heap calamities on them, and send my arrows against them.
So this is against his own people. Now, we back up some and look at verse 18, but we need to be back even more. Go to the very beginning of the chapter. But here's what we're going to see. Saying that the Lord is recounting to them through Moses, saying how you had gone after other gods. This is over the past 40 years in the wilderness. Remember that they're just about to go into the promised land. He said that you sacrificed to demons that were not gods, to gods that you had not even ever known. New gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never even dreaded before. You were, look at verse 18, you were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. So the Lord saw it, and he spurned them. He said, all right, if you want to go this other way, I will sell you into their hands, as it were, so that all it's going to take will be one of them to come against you, and you'll be frightened away. We're going to put 1,000 of you to flight, and 2 of them will come. It's going to 100-fold of that. That's 1,000-fold, isn't it? 1,000 and a 10,000. That's 1,000-fold. 2 of them are going to put 10,000 to flight. 1,000, 10-fold, 10,000. Exactly, it was 10-fold. That's what I was trying to say. Yes, the 1 decimal, the 1 0. All right. What does it mean, sold them into their hands? All we need to do is to get a little picture of this in Judges. Let's go to Judges chapter 2 for a moment. And Judges is depicting a period of time in Israel's history that precedes the time frame we're in right now with David. Because who was the last judge of Israel? Samuel, and he's the one who anointed Saul to be king. Saul is still king, but who is the anointed king to succeed him? David is. All right, so that helps put a bit of time frame into our minds here. And let's look at Judges chapter 2 and verse 14.
So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to the plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies. They could no longer withstand their enemies.
So why did he do this? All we got to do is read verse 8 onwards and see that now, after Joshua has died and the elders along with him, that now there's a generation that has raised up, that has grown up, that did not know the Lord. And as a result, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And they served verse 11, they served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them. They bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord, and they served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, so that the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to the plunderers. And they got plundered. He sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies. So I know she read it, but I wanted to tie it together. Pardon me? Oh, sorry, he did. Yes, Todd did. Busy day. Listen, I'm doing well to be standing in front of you tonight. And it doesn't stop here. All right, this is how the age of the judges begins. This is how it's defined. And then we had seen in our first, it was a couple of weeks ago, that the people did what was evil or right in their own eyes because there was no king.
This sure seems an awful lot like modern day.
It seems a lot like modern day. Yeah, it does. We see it again in chapter 3 and verse 8. Same phrase that's being used here. They ran after the Baals, forgot the Lord. And then we see in verse 8, the anger of the Lord was kindled. And he sold them into the hand of. There's a big word for you. There's a nice name. You want any grandkids? You want to? Hey, that's a great one for Caitlin and Caleb. Consider this name. What's the C name? Cushan Rishathaim. Anyway, he's king of Mesopotamia. And the people served this king, Rishathaim, for 8 years. And then the people cried out to the Lord, and he sent a deliverer, Othniel. Othniel.
But that's the mercy of God. They keep crying out. He sends a deliverer. They turn away. They cry out. He sends a deliverer. They turn away. Like it's just over and over and over.
Yes. So we see the faithfulness of God is Hesed. His steadfast love. Now, we see it again in chapter 4 and verse 2 with Deborah and Barak, that the Lord sold them into the hand of their enemies, and then God raised up a judge. And then we see it again in chapter 10 and verse 7. That particular phrase, the Lord sold them into the hand of their enemies, and then he raised up a judge, and that one was Jephthah. All right, so you see the idea here? The people forgot the word of God, and they turned away from the Lord, and instead of walking in the truth of the word of God, they were walking by their sight, and because of that, they were walking in fear. And instead of having their enemies departing from them 7 ways, all it takes is one to rout 1,000 of them. Who's the one standing in front of them right now? Goliath. And for the last 40 days, they haven't run off, but they have been afraid. They've been routed. They've been run off in a sense, right? Fear has run them crazy. Well, the word of David's faith has come to the king's attention. And David said, "Don't let anyone's heart fail because of him. I will go, your servant will go, and I will kill this Philistine. I'll fight with him." But he's got a confidence. But fear says, you are not able to go against this Philistine because you're only a boy, a youth, a child, a young man. He's been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, "Not so. Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. When there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard." So he was basically willing to let the animal go. But if it rose against him, he stood up. It sounds like he had more. This was more than one occasion. Took him by the beard and struck him and killed him. I've struck down both lions and bears. And this, notice how he calls him again. He doesn't just say this giant or this man or this Philistine. He calls him this uncircumcised Philistine. Philistine means that he's an enemy, and uncircumcised means that he's not of the covenant, the people of God. We've been given the covenant and the covenant promises. But they're not walking in it. And the Philistines, they don't have it. So he says that this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. Why? Because he has defied the armies of the living God. Notice he doesn't say because he has defied the armies of Israel. It's not about the army, it's about the God of the army. So he's convinced Saul, and Saul tells him in verse 37, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Lord be with him. Right? Because here comes David. He's not even in the army. What's with that? Right. But he's a youth, and he's the one who's got faith to trust in God. All of these ones that should be leading the way in faith, they're not, because they have gotten their eyes off of God and onto a man. Off of God and onto the circumstance. So Saul decided he needed to clothe David in his armor, but David, he put a helmet of bronze on David and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped his sword over his armor and tried in vain to go, and he says, no, that's not the way this is working. I've not tested them, so he put them off, and then he took his staff in his hand, chose, well, first of all, so we're in verse 40 right in the moment, but everybody look up here for a moment. Did you learn the song in Sunday school, whether you were attended Sunday school or maybe you were a Sunday school teacher, Only a Boy Named David? Anyone know that song? Only a boy named David, only a shepherd's sling, only a boy named David, but he could pray and sing. Only a boy named David, down by the rippling brook. You know the reactions, come on. Only a boy named David. Say it louder. 5 little stones he took. 1. Say it loud. 1.
little stone.
Say it loud. 1.
One little stone.
All right, so let's stop there. How many stones did he pick?
5.
5 what stones? 5 little stones went in the sling. And the sling went around. Oh, excuse me.
One little stone went
One
in the
little
sling.
stone went in. Pick 5 little stones. Now I've got.
I gave him a buckshot.
There we go. All right.
That would miss it.
All right. So the song has. How many of you sang that song?
Probably did when I was really young.
All right,
I guess
so-
I haven't heard it in such a long
Probably not a bad thing.
time.
And that rendition wasn't the best. Yeah, but it was good. Fun, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, it gives the idea, though, that he went and got 5 little stones. But he didn't get 5 little stones. What did he get? He chose 5 smooth stones. Okay, so what's the difference? 5 little stones, 5 smooth little stones. No, that's not what's going on here. 5 smooth stones. Let's have a look at our screen. Here's 5 smooth stones. This is the size of a baseball. Between the size of a tennis ball and a baseball. All right? So when he went down to the brook to find 5 smooth stones, he's getting some heavy artillery here. This is not the sling of your childhood. This is not the sling that Dennis the Menace carried around in his back pocket. That's not this.
No, it's this.
So what he's slinging is this. All right? So it's a pocket, a pouch with 2 long strands. Each strand was about a cubit. Todd, would you show us how long?
Get on the crazy.
So each strand was about a cubit. So when you lengthened it out, it's double that length. Okay, it's 2 cubits long. When you let it go, it's that lace or the string, I should say, leather or whatever it was, or braided reed or whatever they were using for rope. Then it would have been with a pocket in the middle, and it would have been about 2 cubits long. These things, slingers were more feared than archers on the battlefield.
The tribe of Benjamin was noted for their
Slinging,
slinging. Yeah. They could do it
either hand.
both ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy I teach under course.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah.
Was in the First Nations. He said he's pretty accurate.
He's pretty accurate with one. Yeah. Is that Mark? Mm-hmm. Well, since I was looking this up and looking at these pictures, I remember seeing several years ago, they have competitions. And somewhere in Greece, I think it is, they have a whole group of people that they have, it's called Balearic slings, but that's the style that you'd be referring to that David would have used. And they have these Balearic sling competitions all the time. So then I saw the tutorials how to make these slings. So anyway, now I'm going to make a sling sometime.
Why do that? I'll be ordering glass.
Yeah. All right.
Could sling, the left-handed ones could sling a stone at a hair and not miss.
Yes, at a hair. They were, and where was that? Where is that found in me?
Judges 20.
Judges 20. The tribe of Benjamin, 600 of them, right? 700. They could sling with the right or the left and aim at a hair and not miss.
That's a select.
Hair.
But there has to be
Or a rabbit.
hair. No, this strand of hair. Strand of hair. Can't relate to that.
They're sportive.
So, the sling was in his hand and he approached the Philistine. No time to waste in here. David had recognized there's a problem and he's going to approach it, address it. God did not waste any time addressing the problem with this giant. Not Goliath, but the giant serpent. You might say, well, it took 4,000 years for Jesus to come and die on the cross. But he wasted no time, did he? In the garden, at the day they sinned, they disobeyed, God wasted no time and he addressed the problem. What did he do? Gave a sacrifice. But first, before he made a sacrifice, to cover their guilt, he made a promise. And the promise was not something he just came up with. It's a promise now for the first time stated to the ears of mankind of something that had already been determined before God created the heavens and the earth. There's a deliverer coming. And all throughout the scriptures, we see depictions of this deliverer over and over and over and over again. So that the Lord's saying, just look, and you'll get pictures, foreshadowings, hints, types, shadows of the one that I am going to send and what I'm going to do through him. Well, look at, as David moves to the Philistine, verse 41, the Philistine moves forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. Who's the scaredy cat? Probably the shield bearer. Yeah, so Goliath, he needs his shield bearer to go ahead of him. Because of a boy. Now,
Maybe it's just standard procedure, you know?
standard procedure. When the
Well,
Philistine...
The question is, if you've got the shield bearer and then Goliath, and it says Goliath fell face forward, I'm thinking the poor shield bearer got under there somewhere.
Unless he took over.
Timber! And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him because he was young. He was just a kid. So why does Goliath say, am I a dog? That you come to me with sticks. Are you going to waste my time? I came out here to fight and you send me a boy?
Was he insulted?
He was insulted. I'm not going to waste my time. What? Because if he defeats the boy, what is that? Right? And by the now some have said that some commentators have said that Saul perhaps is thinking, all right, well, the worst thing is if David loses, it's going to be he was just a kid. I mean, what did you expect, Goliath? I mean, can't count that. But by sending out a boy, they recognize that it is a taunt against him. And if he does win by some miracle, then how much more is that to add insult to the injury? But Goliath, he's insulted. Why are you sending me just a boy? He disdained him because he was a youth. He said, am I a dog and you're coming out at me with sticks? he cursed David by his gods. You remember that we had looked at the 666 in Revelation chapter 13 is where we had seen that. Just before those verses, in verses 5 and 6, I think it is, 5 through 8, we read that the beast blasphemed God. He spoke blasphemies against the Lord and against the God of heaven and heaven, people of God. Yes, I believe so. So here we see this picture of man cursing not just David by his gods, but cursing the God of David. And you remember what the Lord told David's great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy in Genesis chapter 12. Whoever blesses you, I will bless, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Well, he says, come to me, the Philistine said. Come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds. If you're going to come, then come. And I will make a mess of you. And I'm going to feed you to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Now look what David says in verse 45. So David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. He doesn't say, but I come to you with a sling and a staff. What does he say? I come to you, whom you have defied. He doesn't say you've defied the armies, but the God of the armies whom you have defied. Cade, our grandson's going around the house now chasing Claire. And he says,
I'm going to fight you in the name of the Lord.
I'm going to fight you in the name of the Lord. And Caitlin's like, Cade, that's not really the kind of fight that we're talking about here. So she's in a quandary. Like, how much of this do you encourage, and then where do you draw the line? I'm going to defeat you in the name of the Lord. Get back here, Claire. Anyway, nevertheless, look what he says in verse 48. Who are we at for reading? Carolyn.
All the Philistines moved closer to attack him.
Oh, I'm sorry, 46. 46.
This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine armies to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands.
I want you to notice something. What were the terms of the fight? What were the terms of the battle back in verses 8 and 9?
They defeat Israel.
All right, so one-on-one hand combat, and then whoever wins, the other team, they become our slaves. The enemy does not get to set the terms of the battle or the conflict. What does David say here? He's going to feed whose carcass to the birds?
Goliath.
Not just Goliath.
And the whole army.
The entire army. This isn't David saying, so okay, I'm gonna feed your carcass to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field here, Goliath, and then the rest of your buddies back there, they're gonna serve us. Yeah, I'm gonna sit back, kick up my feet, and they're gonna do whatever. No! He's saying every single one of you uncircumcised Philistines, I'm going to feed all of your carcasses to the beasts of the field, the birds of the air. So that, what? So that all will know, all this assembly, you guys over there and the guys standing behind me that have been quaking in their boots because of you. He says, so that all of this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand, because there is a God in Israel. So he's got it in the right perspective and in the right order. The enemy does not get to call the shots or draw up the terms of the conflict. No, that is arrogance, the arrogance of fear, trying to silence us and say, here's what I'm going to do to you, and so on and so forth. No, you don't get to make the terms. It's already been done. The Lord has already determined the terms, and the battle has already been fought, and it's already been won. So now we don't fight for victory, we rather fight from victory. In other words, from a position of victory. The Lord has already fought. The battle is not ours, it is the Lord's. The stone has already been rolled. So we see this stone that's being thrown, slung at him. It hits him where? Right in the forehead. And what does he do? Falls face first. Do you remember what the Lord said as a curse to the serpent? From now on, you will slither on your belly and you will eat dust. What happens to the giant? Falls on his face and eats dust. Now, interestingly, we got to finish off. All right, let's look at verse 50. Let's wrap this up, okay? We're good with that, to wrap this up? Let's look at verse 50. I jumped over 48 and 40. Well, we just spoke about that. All right, read it for us, Brian, 48 and 49.
As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him, reaching into his bag and taking out a smooth stone. He slung it and struck the Philistine up on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground.
So let's look at just a bit further. Let's go on and let's look at verses 50 to 54. We'll finish off there.
You keep reading?
Yes, let's go.
So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand. He struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. And the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath, to the gates of Ekron. Their dead bodies were strewn along the Sharon road to Gath and Ekron. More?
Two more. The end of 54.
When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistine's weapons in his own tent.
That's quite something. He struck the Philistine and killed him, but there's no sword in David's hand. So what does he do? Goes over to Goliath's body, his fallen body, takes his sword, and cuts his head off. Removes his head from his shoulders. Must have been awfully heavy, yeah. Can you imagine? It's like... But the weight of the sword would have made the work a lot easier.
Once he got her coming down.
Once it started coming down, job was already completed, right? And then they pursued the Philistines, and their bodies were strewn everywhere. But you notice what the people of Israel, they pursued them. Why? Because faith has now been ignited by David, or more so, the victory that the Lord had given through David. And kind of an interesting thing that's being spoken of here, where it says, the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine, brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his armor in his tent. You get a picture of this? We're going 15 miles from Elah, the valley of Elah, all the way to Jerusalem. So let's have a look at this next. Here's, see if I've got the right. Yeah, so there's Jerusalem that's highlighted. We've got, oh, that's not what I wanted on here. That's, okay, yes it is. Yeah, so Jerusalem will end up becoming the capital of Israel. We've got, just above that is Gibeah. That's where Saul is from. That's where Saul basically has his headquarters, if you will. And then we've got Hebron, which is where David is going to end up setting up his kingdom when he ends up becoming king to begin with. All right? Just to give you an idea of what's going on here. Now, let's come to this next screen. This is what I wanted to get focused on. Pardon me?
Pointing them out, I didn't know you had them all.
Oh, okay, sorry. So we've got Gath. So this is where the battle's been going on. They went all the way to Gath. Here they are in Ekron. So those are the two places that they pursued them to. And then we see that this is the valley of Elah. And let's click it one more time. David takes the head of Goliath all the way to Jerusalem. That's David holding up Goliath's head. So let's click it one more time.
The Battle of Armageddon takes place.
No, this isn't where Armageddon. Armageddon is farther north, about 80 miles. Now, why does David take the head of the giant to Jerusalem?
Because Jerusalem wasn't even, that was the city of the Jebusites.
Jerusalem was the city of the Jebusites.
Conquer them next.
He takes him to Jerusalem, I believe, is a foreshadowing, because what's going to happen in Jerusalem in another 1,000 years? Jesus conquered the enemy there. And what is just on the outskirts of Jerusalem? A city called, or a town, I guess I should say, called, what's that? There is that, but that's to the south, just north of the city of Jerusalem is the city of Nob. And that's where the tabernacle is right now. That's where it's set up. So David goes there and he brings the head of the giant, of the serpent, if you will, the seed of the serpent, and brings his head to the tabernacle, to Jerusalem, and just on the outskirts of Jerusalem to know where the tabernacle is, as a prophetic act signifying what his descendant and his predecessor, because Jesus is the root and the offspring of David, right? Who will come to that place in 1,000 years from then. And he will do what was symbolically done on the valley of Elah and in the city of Jerusalem that day. That's the story of David and Goliath.